Disney. Our story this week is about the quarter horse. Speed, strength, and cow sense are his trademarks. He began the all-purpose horse of the settlers in Virginia and the Carolinas. When the first thoroughbred horse came to America, he found the quarter horse there before him. The settlers rode and drove the quarter horse during the week and raced him a quarter of a mile on Sundays and holidays. His great speed at this distance gave him his name. The quarter horse went west with the settlers. He worked his way by herding cattle, carrying the mail, and even unwittingly helped many a bank and train robber make a fast getaway. Although his blood has mixed along the way with that of the Mustang and Thoroughbred, there have been certain breeders in the Southwest with vision enough to preserve his unique type and abilities. These breeders have made the quarter horse what he is today, the most versatile horse in the world. In looking for someone to narrate our story, we could think of no one better than Rex Allen. Rex was born and reared in the cattle country of Arizona, and he's known, owned, and admired quarter horses all his life. And in helping to create our story for you, Rex plays the role of an Arizona rancher, a role in which he is completely at home.
You know, almost every ranch that has a horse has a tack room, a place where they keep bridles and saddles and all the rest in one place. As you can see, mine sort of got out of hand here in the last few years because I've always been interested in the history of the Southwest as seen through the equipment of its horsemen. And these saddles can tell us a lot. This one is one of the oldest. It was ridden by an old Mexican caballero many, many years ago, long before the Southwest was even a part of the United States. Now, there's quite a change between then and now. The horses and saddles are both better now. The quarter horse was good to begin with, but he's even better now. In the story I'm about to tell you, you'll visit some of the most famous ranches in the Southwest, ranches that wrote quarter horse history. And you'll see what the cowboy and his horse are like today. Now, here on the wall, we have pictures of two great quarter horse stallions that have to do with our story. Now, this is Driftwood. His colts have carried a lot of good ropers to the rodeo pay window. And here's Cardinal, a sire from the famous King Ranch in Texas. He carries a lot of the blood of Old Sorrel, which is the foundation sire for all the King Ranch quarter horses. Now, our story concerns a certain quarter horse mare and her owner, a girl named Elena Vasquez from an old California ranching family. It all started when Elena discovered something I didn't know. That I had a mare and a filly who were the last of a great line of quarter horses started by her grandfather many years ago. She sure wanted to buy that mare. And I was just as sure I didn't want to sell her. And one day Elena came to Arizona to my ranch. And even though she knew that mare wasn't for sale, she just had to see her anyway. Bring him on in, Joe. Good-looking colt. Short ears in the back.
If you won't sell me the mare, will you sell me the filly?
You've got me in a kind of an embarrassing position, Miss Vasquez. I know you'd like to have the bloodline back in the family, but to tell you the truth, I've started a little breeding program about a year ago, and that mare is the most important part of it. I may have quite a little of that stock around in a few years. Why don't you come back and take a look then?
Well, looks like your mind's made up.
It is. I hate to disappoint you altogether. We're working some cattle over in the Mesquite Corral. Would you like to step on a horse and help us a little while?
I'd love to.
Come on. calf roper. How'd you like to try one outside on old Red?
All right, fine.
I guess you've hit a soft spot in me, but I'm going to let you have that filly.
Do you mean it?
We'll wean her in about 6 months, and I'll ship her out to you.
You'll never regret it.
Elena couldn't wait the 6 months before I shipped the filly to her. She had to start right in gentling her and getting acquainted. And she gave her a name, too, the Bay Lady. And then when things were worked out to everybody's satisfaction, something happened to change it all. This mare that I had such high hopes for was found one morning dying. There was no warning, nothing. She was gone before anyone could help her. And Elena's filly was an orphan. Was to feed and care for the little one until we could find her a foster mother. We took her to another part of the ranch where there was a mare with a colt about the same age. This mare was a good and had plenty of milk for 2 colts. So we hoped she would accept the orphan. But she wanted nothing to do with the little Bay Lady. Then luck and looking brought us a lame old work mare that had lost her colt. After her other experience, the young'un was kind of cautious. But we tied the mare to the fence, and loneliness and a little hunger made the filly braver. Our problem was solved when the old mare took her on as if she'd been waiting for her. So Elena's highly bred filly happily followed her new mother, an old mare who was worthless to everybody except the little Bay Lady. There was a new man working on this outlying part of the ranch, and he just figured the mare's colt was her own, and like the others, that they were of no breeding we wanted to keep. It wasn't until several months later that I was able to trace that filly. She was on a ranch in New Mexico. I would have been able to recover her then if it hadn't been for a cowboy by the name of George. If he hadn't gotten so fed up with fence fixing, things would have taken a different turn, and Elena Vasquez would have had her filly back in California.
Sure hate to see you quit, George.
Well, Abe, you're all through cattle work now, and I don't take much of this fence building. I think I better be on the road.
I wish you'd stay a little while longer. I'm kind of short right now and be in better shape to pay you.
Well, isn't there something we could do so I could get on the way?
The only thing I know, I got this Wiener filly here, and if you'd consider taking her for what I owe you, why, I'd be glad to let you have her.
How's she bred, Abe?
They tell me her mother's a workmare, but I don't believe it. She looks too good.
Let's take a look at her.
All right.
I like her, Abe. I'll take her.
Well, if she suits you and if you think it'll settle it, why, it's a deal.
George was a good cowboy, but he was a drifter. As he left this ranch to look for another job, he didn't have any salary in his jeans, but he had a good filly at the end of his lead rope. George drifted right onto the great Wagner Ranch in the north of Texas. They claim to have the biggest spread under one fence in the whole country. Now, this outfit is so big, they even keep special fence-fixing crews, so George had nothing to worry about. He was mounted on a good Wagner quarter horse and had plenty of cattle work to do. It was a season for branding. There hadn't been anything invented that could equal a good working cow horse in a spot like this. When a range extends as far as the eye can see, you can't expect to bring squeeze chutes and corrals to the cattle, but you can bring horses. Cowboys were earmarking, branding, and vaccinating for the dreaded blackleg. This life calls for tireless men and horses. There's no time clock. This is the world George belonged to, the world of cattle. And of horses, especially bred to handle the cattle. For the Wagner Ranch is one of those who have written quarter horse history. This is a band of Wagner mares and colts, all heavy in the blood of such famous horses as Yellow Jacket, Blackburn, Pretty Buck, and Poco Bueno. These horses was bred to maintain the highest quarter horse standards. They're close coupled, sturdy of muscle, and they run free as the deer that are still abundant on these ranges. This is the Wagner Remuda, one of the largest herds of trained cow horses in existence. They're being rounded up and brought to one of the cow camps to supply the cowboys with fresh horses for the rest of the day. Cowboy has about 16 horses for his own use. And as the Remuda is brought into camp, Each man sends a loop curling out with snake-like precision to rope the horse he wants. Every one of these quarter horses has been bred for a specialized ability called cow sense. What is cow sense? Well, maybe it can be described best by just watching this little Texas quarter horse named Jody Earl as he cuts a heifer from a herd. Puts cow sense in a horse? It's sires like Pocoano of the Wagner Ranch, who, like his own sire, King, is among the most famous modern-day quarter horses. His owner, E. Paul Wagner, carefully works out a breeding program for Pocoano each year and turns him out in the spring with certain selected mares. It's no accident that Pocoano's what he is. He's descended from Traveler, a fountainhead of great modern running quarter horses, and through him to an amazing horse named Xantanon, who left a legacy of incredible stamina, heart, speed, and cow sense, and to none of his line in larger quantity than he left to Pocoano. And so, in this atmosphere of fine livestock breeding, some of the yearling Wagner mares welcomed the new Cowboys filly to spend the next years just eating and growing. At the end of the 2 years, George had drifted back to Arizona. His filly was old enough to be ridden, and if anybody'd been around to recognize it, she was beginning to show a certain quality of head and neck that was the stamp of her sire, the stallion Driftwood. This, and the way she moved under saddle, told George that he'd made the greatest bargain of his life when he took the filly on. Cattle make cow horses, that is, cattle, cowboys, and that inborn quarter horse trait called cow sense, which began to prove George's filly to be a natural. Alert and always interested, she began to know how a critter thinks. Anything he could do with cattle was fine with George, but when they put him to riding fence, he got that old urge to move on. While I was visiting around at a rodeo one day out behind the chutes, a bay mare caught my eye. I didn't give it much thought till she walked by again. I introduced myself to the boy that was on her and asked him how she was bred. That head and neck had made me look twice. It had Driftwood written all over it. I had a hunch. Yep. Her teeth showed the right age, and even the spot on her forehead matched. Then I went up into the grandstand to watch Harley May and his little quarter horse in the bulldogging. Harley's one of the country's top rodeo professionals. The calf roping came next, and I saw the boy on that bay mare go behind the barrier to get ready. The way that bay mare left the chute and caught her calf made me all the more sure my hunch was good. And I made up my mind I wouldn't leave the grounds that day without getting a real line on that mare. Since I'd just barely met the bay mare's owner, I didn't know that he was one of those cowboys that can't let the dice alone. There are a few people that always seem to be lucky. George wasn't one of them. But this racehorse man had that kind of reputation. But George wasn't bothered. The next throw could always be a lucky one. He'd already lost his money, but there was always his saddle. Today, the galloping dominoes were passing for only one man. But with a true gambler's optimism, George was sure that if he could stay in the game long enough, he could beat the odds. The stakes were getting higher. But as long as he was in the hole this far, he figured he might as well stay in for everything he was worth. And he was worth exactly one bay mare. Didn't take long. The racehorse man had a new mare that looked like she had some speed in her. After the rodeo, I looked up the cowboy because I wanted to keep tabs on that mare until Elena could see her. But I was one dice game too late.
Now, wait a minute, Elena. It may not be the Bay Lady, but it sure could be. Yes, all the information I can get seems to fit her. And the man that won her, yes, well, he's a horse race man, and I understand he's going to run her Sonoita this weekend. And if I don't miss my guess, he'll run her in a claiming race. I think it'd be worth your trip to drive over here and take a look at her yourself.
As we know, the quarter horse got his name because of his speed at a quarter mile. At this little country track for quarter racing, the bay mare's new owner figured he'd clean up by entering her in a cheap claiming race. He was gambling again. He was sure there'd be nobody there interested enough to put in a claim for her this first time out. But today, for him, the odds fell the other way. When Elena arrived at the track, she went right to the paddock. With a horseman's instinctive eye, she singled out the bay mare right away, and she scanned her carefully for signs of the breeding she knew so well. The horses were on their way to the starting gate, and there was just enough time to put in a claim. Crossed the finish line first or not had no effect on Elena's claim, but how the Bay Lady ran, if this was the Bay Lady, would tell the real story. Wasted no time starting for home. As far as she was concerned, this mare's real career was just beginning.
Back in California, riding the old familiar coastline of her ranch, Elena found herself better mounted than she had ever been before. Working the cattle had never been so easy as it was now on the Bay Lady, because it was the Bay Lady. The American Quarter Horse Association had helped Elena and me retrace the mare's trail until there was no doubt of her identity. To find in this bloodline, but it didn't take her long to realize that the mare needed more training to bring out her versatility. As good a horsewoman as she was, Elena knew the mare needed someone whose knowledge went further than hers. And as far as she was concerned, his name was Jimmy Williams. Saw what Elena had brought him, he recognized a type that every reined horseman hopes someday to get. A radical departure from traditional methods of Western horse breaking, the Bay Lady needed relaxing from her previous training and even the little racing she'd had. So he started her like she was a beginner. He drove her in a breaking cart. This set her head position, and with the weight of the cart, gave her balance and movement, particularly in leading with the inside foot as she circled either to the right or to the left. Elena was learning too, along with the Bay Lady. An audience of curious yearlings watched the Bay Lady's education, not realizing that they were getting a glimpse into their own future. By the time the Bay Lady had finished her training, she was a living example of every horseman's dream. She could do everything she'd been taught with just a shoestring in her mouth. Elena's hopes for the Bay Lady were realized in the show ring, where she got a chance to prove her natural ability and training. There she defeated all comers of all breeds to become a champion reined horse. But the life of a quarter horse doesn't begin and end on the racetrack or in the show ring. Like her colonial ancestors, the Bay Lady continued to work for her living. When the Bay Lady left California, it was to fulfill the destiny Elena had planned for her. She was to be bred Great King Ranch of Texas. It's here under the ownership of the Kleberg family, and Mr. Robert Kleberg in particular, that many successful experiments in livestock breeding have been made which have commanded respect and admiration throughout the world. It's to the King Ranch that the quarter horse owes much of its present quality. As Mr. Robert Kleberg has said,
while the art of breeding requires intense application to detail, endless study, observation, and application of a keen artistic sense, the rewards are great, and I know of no task of such consuming and lasting interest.
in the early days, the lean-flanked longhorns were the cattle of the King Ranch ranges. They could travel all day, but they didn't take much beef to market. There was a need for something better. Santa Gertrudis, name of the King Ranch headquarters, was proudly given to a new breed of cattle designed to meet the rugged demands of the South Texas climate. The blood of the English Shorthorn and the East Indian Bramer were mingled to produce an animal immune to the dread tick fever and a fine beef type. Cattle don't just grow. It always takes men on horseback to work them. Like the horses they ride, these men are born and bred to the work they do. From father to son, the traditions of horsemanship and equipment are handed down. Tools of their trade, to be honored and used with skill and care. Proud of working on the King Ranch, these men call themselves Quineños. When a man cares about his cattle, you can pretty near bet he cares as much or more about his horses. On the King Ranch, along with the Santa Gertrudis, a new type quarter horse came forward. Finer, keener, and bred with more of an eye to quality than those before him. Noontime is dinner time in Texas. Even in a cow camp, the big meal is in the middle of the day. Good beef seasoned by the smoke of the mesquite wood fire. Beans with a flavor borrowed from across the border. And sourdough camp bread. These stick to a cowboy's ribs just as good today as they did on the old Chisholm Trail. This was the day the Bay Lady was to arrive at the King Ranch. She was to be bred to hired hands Cardinal. Richard Kleberg, who supervises the quarter horse breeding operations, had seen the Bay Lady and watched her work. That was enough to bring into being a rare exception to the rule, that no outside mares are bred to King Ranch horses. 2 vaqueros were sent to round up Cardinal with his band of mares. To assemble a band of mares like this is a lifetime's work, and they show the success of the program. They have uniformity and type, and their foals are proof of Cardinal's worth as a sire. This band of mares runs with Cardinal, chosen especially for him. Mares are selected with equal care for each of the other King Ranch stallions. What stallions are bred to what mares cannot be a matter of memory on a ranch of such dimensions. It's a matter of supervised record. This is how they do it. Before each mare is turned out in the spring, Dr. Northway, the King Ranch veterinarian, checks her identification brands. On the right, the running W signifies the mare's sire, Wimpy. On the left, the P is for her dam sire, Peppy. Dr. Northway places her breeding sheet in a book where the mares going to each stallion are recorded. As the Bay Lady was not a King Ranch mare, the stallion was to be brought to her. When she arrived, Richard Kleberg wanted his Uncle Robert to see her work, and Elena's foreman was glad to have the chance to show her off.
foolhardy Nall was brought in to meet the Bay Lady. Elena's plan to carry on her grandfather's dream was about to become real. Elena had turned the Bay Lady out in one of the mountain pastures to await the birth of her colt. They had figured through past experience that the heavy winter weather would be gone and the feed was good there too. But the Bay Lady's life had been molded by the unexpected, and this time was to be no exception. A freak storm came blasting down out of the northwest. All the other brood mares had been brought down into the lower pastures. The Bay Lady was not among them. When her time was due, evidently she had left the herd looking for a more isolated spot to have her colt. Elena knew there were no roads into the back canyons of those high pastures, and the snow on the trails would be too deep for horses. The only way to spot the Bay Lady would be by helicopter. Like many another rancher, Elena knew from experience that helicopter pilots can generally open up any area, no matter how tough or impassable. She wouldn't likely be too far away, but the big hazard was flying in among the trees to try and spot her. And there they were, the Bay Lady and her first colt. They looked all right, too, except the mare stood like she had her foot caught in something under the snow. And when an animal is helpless, it doesn't take long for varmints to find out about it. It was the hidden fork of a buried branch that wedged her foot. Lady's little daughter evidently hadn't minded her cold reception into the world. She acted like she was all ready to go. But maybe what was about to happen to her wasn't exactly what she had in mind.
herder'd have that filly over the hill to one of the ranch line camps in a matter of minutes. But Elena and the Bay Lady were just going to have to slog it out by themselves. It was no surprise to Elena that the mare and the filly came through the rough going in such good shape. It's what you'd expect from this kind of breeding. In all quarter horse history, there have been certain great individuals like the Bay Lady who have tested and expanded the limits of past performance. Elena had made up her mind that this filly belonged to me, but I felt she deserved to keep this special little snowbird. The quarter horse has come a long way since the early days. What new greatness lies ahead is the kind of a challenge that'll be joyfully and willingly met by those like Elena and the Bay Lady.
Next on DVT, the latest in News Brief.